Have you ever been annoyed with those people who you think would actually just always win at everything that they do? And then there's some of those people that you know that always win at everything they do, no matter what they do. They pick up something and it's just right to gold. Well, in this video, I'm going to identify something called transactional analysis, which asks the question, is your identity a 10 out of 10? Stay tuned. Here we go. What's up, FlowChat Connector? Sean back at you with another high-ticket tune-up. Hope you're doing really well today. Today, we're going to dive into something called transactional analysis. This is something I learned pretty early in my selling career, and it really changed the way that I feel about myself. It brought out a lot of these feelings of like to own and be a sales professional is a truly valued position instead of, what other people's perceptions of being a salesperson really was. And it gave me this clarity and this moment of truth and this permission line to where I could run down the path and be like, yeah, no, like I actually cheer for sales professionals who are truly good at sales that also have a healthy understanding of their identity versus their role. And so in this video, I want to talk about a couple of things really focused on you, right? Is your identity a 10 out of 10? So let's answer that question, right? Got a couple of slides. We're going to bring Yoda out on this one, kind of talk about it. So first of all, like I mentioned, right? Do you know those people that always succeed? Whatever they seem to pick up, they always just win at whatever it is, right? And then those other people who you think should be winning, but they don't win for one reason or another. They're just not winning. And I've thought about this concept a tremendous amount, especially after learning this. And it's very abundantly clear when you get a little bit of like vision on why this is actually happening. And so I wanted to start with but just by saying this, the most successful people have a healthy understanding between identity and role. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, stay tuned. And by the way, smash this like button, share this out to somebody that needs it. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you find some value in here, because I know going through this helped me a tremendous amount, and I think it can help you too. So remember, the most successful people have a healthy understanding between identity and role. Let's do a thought experiment. For 1 second, imagine that you're on a deserted island. It could be any kind of island that you want anywhere in the world. And it's only you, right? And we're going to strip away all of your roles that you play in a day-to-day world, right? No husband, no brother, no sister, no cousin, no family members, no job, no money restraints or constraints or anything like that. No partnership. It's just you. You're just solely on this island all by yourself as an individual, and you have no bearing, and there's nobody else on the island. Would you rate yourself as an identity of a 10 out of 10? That's the one question I have for you. Because look, when you were born as a baby, you came out of the womb. When you were born, were you a 10 out of 10? Most people would say yes, right? As we grow up, what happens is the economic pressures are put on us, and we start having these roles defined on us. Hey, you got to go to school. You got to get good grades. You got to get a job. You got to get married. You got to have kids. You got to do this. You got whatever the role is. Socioeconomic pressure is put on you. And what happens is as you're growing up, right? And so let me get into this a little bit more. So you might be thinking like we're doing this thought experiment and you're on this island and you're like, Sean, like I can't be a 10 because without my roles, I would be worthless. So people tell me this all the time. Oh, how could anybody be a 10, Sean? Nobody is perfect. Other people say, hey, my role is what I am, right? Or maybe you can't separate roles from whatever is left. In fact, you can. And so as we talk about you being a baby, you're a 10 out of 10 when you come out of the womb. And as you start to grow up, hey, you're a good person. I want to know you for you, right? Even when we get into school, it's like, hey, most report cards stop at your son or daughter failed at these 3 events or these 3 topics. And that makes them, like not good at school. But, and this is where most, grade school and most everything stops. They stop at the but. He's a really good person or she's a really wonderful individual, right? That part is the identity, right? You identify as a really wonderful person. You identify as somebody that is a human doing the best possible thing that they can ever do. And you're on that island and you have no judgment. That is your identity, where your role is what it is. You're going to school, you're learning a job, you're becoming a pro salesperson, whatever the case. And these two things are completely separate. Let's take this example. If you don't believe me still, imagine you want to grow a rose. And so you go to the store and you buy a rose seed. and you plant that seed. Now, the moment you plant that seed, what is the value of that seed on a scale of 1 to 10 as the identity of the seed? Is it a 10 out of 10, right? Or is it less than that? Now, if you say it's less than that, you're wrong, right? And the reason you're wrong is because that seed has potential to blossom into this amazing rose, and its role is to grow and blossom. Its identity as a seed is, look, we're going to plant the seed. It's an identity of 10. Now this little bud pops up. Again, you have to ask yourself a question, objectively looking at this. Is that little bud, identity-wise, is it a 0 or is it a 10 out of 10? There is no difference, right? And in this case, it's always going to be a 10 out of 10. Its role is growing into becoming a blossoming rose. And then finally, as it blossoms into a rose, is that rose a 10 out of 10? Yes, you grew a rose, like from a seed. That's a 10 out of 10, right? Its identity, maybe it has some bad petals or has something else. Like maybe the role as a rose is not quite as high as a 10 out of 10, but the intent in that seed turned into an identity. And these are the big separators that most people forget about, right? And so if you understand the difference between the identity of the seed versus the role of what the seed is supposed to and be and do in its lifetime, and you can have a healthy balance between the two, you're going to win much more often, right? And so what I'd like you to do is now imagine yourself back on that island. Think about yourself. Are you a 0? Are you a 10? Where do you stand on that line as an identity? Now let's look at your roles. An example would be like becoming a sales professional. When you start becoming a sales professional, you might start at 0, 1, or 2 because your role is maybe you have the gift of gab. Maybe you're good at talking to people, maybe whatever the case. But as you get better at sales, your role rating continues to climb and climb. It does not affect the fact that you're an identity of 10. Right? So imagine going back to that island for a second and you build a castle right on the middle of this island. And this island, this is a fortress castle of yours. And around it, you have this really big moat that has all these gators and crocs and all these things that will eat anybody that comes in. You have a drawbridge, right? So every morning you go into, or every this is your home. So you go to your home, you sleep in your home, and you have the drawbridge up. When you're inside your castle, there's no judgment. Your identity of a 10. You have healthy self-esteem. You are a person. You're not tied to the roles that are outside of your moat. See, each day as a sales professional, in this example, you lower your drawbridge, you go across the moat, and you enter the real world. And in the real world, you have all the socioeconomic pressures for you in your roles of the day. It doesn't affect your identity, right? And so you go and you get beat up by clients all day and prospects. You're getting told no, you're this, all these other pressures, and it starts to affect the performance of your role. Maybe you start your role as a 10. Maybe you go close 10 out of 10 deals, or maybe now you're outside and you only close a few deals. And it's like your role that day is going to be a 2 or a 3 if you only close 1 out of 10. But then you go across your drawbridge, put it back up and stop from the moat. And now you're in your castle. You can't let your role and what happened during that day affect your identity. If you do that, you will have a worse outcome in your life. You won't be happy. It'll leak into your personal life and everything else. So all I'm asking is like to keep this thing separate for yourself and watch your business, your life, everything grow. I want to share the 3 different buckets, and it's good to. So you have winners. So winners have an identity of 10 always, right? And their role is the role they play, the things they're at. They're like, this is where you can never be a 10 out of 10 in a role. I agree with that. If you're a 7 plus, you're considered a winner. So you have an identity of 10 and you have a role of 7 plus all the time, right? A non-winner is somebody who has a identity of 0 to 3 and a role of 0 to 3. And the role typically affects the identity. This is somebody who grew up not having the difference or understanding the difference between these 2 things, and they end up being a non-winner, right? And then you have this other group of people who are called the at-leasters. The at-leasters have an identity score of between 3 and 7. They usually let the socioeconomic factors leak in and change things. And the role that they play, maybe they're not really good at it. Maybe they haven't become a specialist. Maybe they, are being reprimanded at work or whatever, but they let all of that affect their identity because they have it configured as one thing instead of keeping it as 2 separate things. And as a quick example, meet Steve. He's an at-leaster. Here's what I mean. This will be a very explicit and good example for you. Steve is a traditional sales guy, and he goes out one day and he closes 10 deals out of 10 deals, and he's crushing it. And all of a sudden, he comes home at night and he's sitting on his bed and he's like, man, there's no way I should have closed 10 out of 10. Like, I'm not that good. And that's what he's thinking in his head. This is imposter syndrome because he's letting his role creep in and like affect how his identity is. Now his identity is scored between that 5, we'll call it a 5. So Steve is an out-leaster, his identity score is 5, and his role score is roughly a 4 to 6. Okay, so it averages around. Now the two are very, very similar, but he comes home after he closes 10 deals out of 10 deals, and he's like, oh my God, I'm not that good. And the next day he goes out and he has another 10 sales calls and he closes 1 out of 10. Subconsciously that night when he told himself, hey, I'm not that good, what happened is that subconscious mind said, well, I got to go right the ship. Because if he closed 10 out of 10 and he's not that good and he believes that he's not that good, the next day he's only going to close 1 out of 10. So now his average is 5 or 6 out of 10. And that's where that 5 or 6 rating is for his role, which then leaks back to his identity. This puts people in that place of where you're just basically like comfortable and you're not really thriving. You're not really, you're not on the survive line and you're not on the thrive line. You're somewhere in between those two. It's because your identity is mixed in with your role. So if you could separate the two, you could push your identity out one way and understand that you're a 10 out of 10. You came out of the womb as a 10 out of 10. People love you because of who you are. That means you're a 10 out of 10. You have good intentions. Yeah, of course, you're going to have negative thoughts and everything else that'll creep in, but just know that you're always a 10 out of 10 from an identity standpoint because you're a human being. Human beings are perfect, right? But your role, the socioeconomic stuff is different. And so Steve here then goes out and now he has this average of 6 out of 10 deals instead of 10 out of 10. So why does all this matter, Sean? You're saying all these things and it's like, why does all this matter? And here's the bottom line. If you fail to address both identity and role in your training for whatever you're doing, whether it be becoming a sales professional, whether it become whatever, you will not achieve permanent improvement. And going back to that, and let me read that again. If you fail to address both identity and role in your training, you will not achieve permanent improvement. And if you're consistently trying to become a better performer, higher level of achievement, highest performing type people, you need to have a very clear definition that your identity is a 10 and you are perfect in that role or in that way. But when you move over to your roles, you might not be a 10 and that's okay. That's where you got to fail to succeed. That's where you got to try and do things better. And this is why you should say when somebody asks, hey, is your identity a 10 out of 10? You can say yes. With that said, hopefully you learned something from this one today. This is a valuable one. A lot of people love this session when I kind of go through it and talk about it. If you have any more questions about that, or you want me to go in deep detail about anything more on this, drop a comment below. Let me know. Otherwise, please smash that like button, share this out to somebody else who needs it. And of course, if you found some value in this and it maybe changed your perspective, smash that subscribe button because I got a lot more coming. With that said, I love your face and I can't wait to see you next time. Bye for now.